Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this wonderful morning on December 22nd, 2025 at 6:30 a.m. in the morning here in the Central Time Zone in the United States. So again, thank you for coming out and sitting with us this morning for our bi-weekly Dharma talk here at the Blue Lotus Meditation and Mindfulness Center. We are located in central Minnesota, about 2 hours north of Minneapolis. If you're familiar with that, if not, come visit us. You're always welcome to come see us. Just some brief announcements before we begin our Dharma talk. We now have on our Facebook channel some new live sessions. So every Wednesday morning at 7 a.m., we will have maybe a 15, 20 minute, 30 minute guided meditation, an opportunity to ask questions and answers, perhaps meet new practitioners in your area, or maybe not even in your area, to help support you in your own practice. So come visit us on our Facebook Live sessions every Wednesday as well. Some really good, exciting news. We have 3 new classes that have just been activated or introduced on our Dharma Institute, and they're advanced classes. And the first one is 2 Truths, right? Dealing with reality. Okay. And so talking about all the different aspects of reality. There's 2 truths for reality. I don't want to give too much away from it. Come check it out if you like. Go ahead and register for that one if you choose. And the Madhyamaka, Nagaruna, and the Middle Way. And then the last one is the Yogasara, the Mind Only School. So feel free to look at those advanced classes if you like, and see how they may help nurture your own practice as well. And then certainly thank you to all of our channel members. Right, we appreciate your additional support in all of our efforts to help bring the Dharma and mindfulness and meditation throughout the world. So let's begin with the 3 jewels. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. Satu, Satu, Satu. You may hear my throat go out a little bit. I am just getting over the flu, so I may have some dry throat every now and then coming up for this talk. So I do apologize in advance for that disturbance or inconvenience. But tonight's topic is grounding in the Dharma in a divided world. And we see this very often, especially what's going on multiple regions in the world. A lot of conflict, division, uncertainty, and fear. And so when we come across those types of instances, right, it brings about violent reactions sometimes. And so with those violent reactions, people don't know how to behave. People don't know how to understand about themselves. People don't understand how peace can unfold. And so that's what tonight is, or this morning's Dharma talk is how we can find and nurture our own grounding in a world that is divided. So together we'll talk about these shared aspirations so that we can understand how we can remain grounded and steady and compassionate in a world that often feels noisy and divided and full of uncertainty. But these times aren't new. And everything that's going on right now, it's not new. Right? And the Buddha himself lived in a time of great social tension, right? Political upheaval and religious conflict. And human beings have always struggled with division. And yet again and again, the Buddha pointed us back to the same refuge, the Dharma, the truth that liberates. Right? And the Buddha taught that peace is not something that we wait for outside. Peace, something that we nurture and cultivate within our own hearts. So when our world becomes fragmented, our task is not to escape or retreat, and certainly not to harden our hearts. Our task is to ground, to plant ourselves firmly in wisdom, in compassion, and in clear seeing. So to help us along this morning, let's explore three separate themes. And the first one is recognizing the roots of division. And then we'll go to returning to the grounding practices of the Dharma. And then becoming present, becoming a presence of peace in the world. So let's begin. So simply just seeing the roots of division. And division does not begin out there. It's not someplace else. Division begins, like all concepts, in the mind. And the Buddha says in the Dhammapada, excuse me, he states that in the Dhammapada, in verse 1, all things are preceded by the mind, right? Led by the mind and created by the mind. When the mind is agitated, the world appears agitated. When the mind is fearful, the world appears threatening. And when the mind is grasping, the world appears competitive. So think about that, right? And our perceptions become the lenses through which we interpret everything. So think about that. When we are grasping at many different ideas and trying to hold on to our own framework, sometimes when we look outside, everything, the world appears competitive. Somebody's trying to get ahead. Somebody is falling behind. Where do I stand? Where does somebody else stand? And so when we grasp and we try to hold on too long, right? So we have to focus on our mind and just being present and having that realization that whatever we're seeing outside really begins with us in our own mind. So what did the Buddha say on conflict? Because conflict happened even back then. So in the Sutta Nipata, the Buddha states, from craving springs grief. From craving springs fear. For one freed from craving, there is no grief. So whence fear? So if you have no cravings, there is no grief, no attachments, right? Because that's what we consider cravings, right? Attachments. Excuse me. Right? So when we have cravings, right, we always we become fearful because we don't want to lose what we have. And that's a false perception because everything is impermanent. Eventually you will lose what you have. So conflict arises whenever the mind clings to views, clings to identity, clings to being right, to what we want the world to be. The Buddha never said that division arises because people are bad. He said that division arises because people are lost in craving, lost in the illusion of separateness. So that's a powerful statement, powerful realization, right? So there aren't bad people. People just cling on to those divisions because they themselves are lost in cravings, right? Lost in that illusion of separateness, that somebody else is different than they are. Somebody has something that they don't have. And notice what happens internally when you encounter someone whose views oppose your own. Contradiction, right? Sometimes begins right in your chest, like, what's this person thinking? What's this person all about? So that contradiction appears in our chest inside us. Sometimes we get that tight feeling. And then the breath tightens, right? Because we feel that they're different than we are. And then we evolve to that sense of me and them, that separateness. And it is in that moment they can feel the birth of division arising in the body itself. So the next time you find someone who has different views, right, strongly held views that are very different than yours, notice how it feels in your body. And that is where that division begins. That is exactly what the Buddha is talking about, that craving, that attachment, that suffering, because that's where it begins. And so the Buddha actually had a word for this, right? Papansa, right? And that's the mind's tendency to proliferate or exaggerate and to create stories of self and others. And so when we become lost in this moment, the world becomes a battlefield. And this is where we need to fall back onto the Dharma, right? And the Dharma gives us a way to step out of that battlefield. Is there perhaps somebody that you know personally or not that you can feel that tension just arise in you when they start talking about whatever their beliefs are? So our next step, or the next topic that we'll kind of explore now, is returning to that grounding practices of the Dharma. And so when the world becomes divided, we ground ourselves not by picking sides, but by returning to the foundations of the practices of mindfulness, of ethics, compassion, and wisdom. So when we recognize that tightness, those beginnings of division in our body, that's a sign. That's a sign for us to take a step back and head towards the Dharma again. Look into it. So grounding through mindfulness. So the Buddha teaches that the contemplation of the body and the feelings and mind and mental objects, right, that these practices are not abstract. They are how we come home to ourselves. Our Dharma cat is about to make a presence. He's about to say hi. Come on. Say hi and then go back down. When the world is loud, we return to the breath. Right? That's focusing back on the Dharma, our breathing, our mindful breathing. When the world is angry, we return to the body, noticing how does our body feel? And when the world is uncertain, we return to awareness. So thinking about that, we become aware, right? When the world is uncertain, right, we return to awareness. Awareness of the Dharma, awareness of the body, awareness of the breath. So it's important for us to recognize those manifestations in our mind and body so that we can return back to our mindfulness practice. Whenever we feel those tight tensions in our body, in our chest perhaps, those thoughts in our minds, what are our triggers? What bring those? What is the cause, the external cause that we feel are those triggers? Because remember, everything starts in here, in the mind. So the Buddha said, just as a rock is unmoved by the wind, so are the wise unmoved by praise or blame. You've probably heard that before, right? Right? Wise people don't get swayed by praise or blame. And mindfulness is the rock, right? It is the still point in a chaotic landscape. So think about that visual. You can find some videos out there, I'm sure, where you can find like a big rock sitting even in a desert, right? And maybe seeing the sand blow by. Right? There's a lot of stock footages out there where you maybe even find a video like this. And look at that, right? Think about that. In those turbulent times in the wind, everybody's moving about. Everybody's busy being blown one direction or another. But the rock stands firm. Wisdom. So what can you do for as practice when those times arise? So when you feel overwhelmed by the news or conflict or fear, simply just pause, right? Come back to your breath. Look and let each inhale anchor you. And let each exhale settle you. So in that simple movement, in that moment, you can reclaim your ground. So breathing in, you're anchored. Breathing out, you're settled. You're not allowing those tides of uncertainty and the wind of noise sway you in one direction or another. You're balanced, you're calm, you're immovable, just like that rock. And we can ground ourselves through right view, right? And so right view is not having the correct philosophy. It's about understanding the nature of reality, right? Because when we think about philosophy in general, right, there are many philosophers out there, right? Many philosophers out there. Socrates. All of a sudden, that's the only one I can remember. But anyway, there's a lot of philosophers, right? You know, especially if we look at the Greeks and Aristotle, right? Plato, a lot of Kant, right? Philosophers out there. So it's not having a correct philosophy. It's just understanding the nature of reality, right? And so we remember that everything is impermanent. Everything is conditioned. And everything changes. And so once we have that view, what begins to dissipate? Attachments and cravings, right? So it's when we forget that impermanence is a reality, we try to force the world into fixed shapes, fixed identities, fixed sides. But when we see clearly, we understand that conflict, like everything else, arises and passes. So, and that doesn't make us passive, right? Simply makes us wise. And there's a distinction. It's an important distinction or consideration, right? Understanding that all conditions cease and something else begins. And so we can also, as a next step, ground ourselves in compassion. And so compassion is the antidote to division, right? Again, the Buddha teaches hatred is never appeased by hatred, right? It's by non-hatred alone that hatred is appeased. And that is the eternal law. So compassion is not weakness. Right? Compassion is the strength that refuses to let the heart become small. Right? Compassion is the strength that refuses to let the heart become small. In times of division, compassion becomes an act of courage. But what does compassion look like? When you think of compassion, what do you think? It could look like pausing before reacting. It could look like listening to someone we disagree with. Remember that tightness? when somebody has a different view than we do. It looks like recognizing our shared vulnerability as human beings. We all have fears of losing something, right? Our own vulnerabilities. It looks like meeting anger with steadiness, right? Rather than more anger. So meeting anger with balance instead of with more anger. And when we cultivate compassion, we begin to heal the world, beginning with ourselves. Fearful people lead others into more fear. And so we also can ground ourselves through ethical living. And the Buddha emphasized that ethical conduct not as moral rules imposed from outside, but as skills that produce out of peace, right? Out of our own peace. So when we speak harshly, we are disturbing our own heart. When we act from greed, we unravel our own well-being. And when we give into anger, we create those inner storms. Right? More storms lead to more storms, more unhappiness with ourselves and others. So ethics is how we keep the mind clear. Ethics is how we keep from feeding those fires of division. And again, the Buddha tells us that one who guards his mind guards happiness. And so when guarding the mind begins with guarding our actions, our speech, and our intentions. So we can become a presence of peace in the world. Right? And grounding in the Dharma is just not about inner peace. It is about how we show up in the world. And some of us want to be role models, and that's fine. That's perfect if we want to be role models. And maybe you're looking for a way to be a role model to someone else. So grounding in peace, grounding in the Dharma is a wonderful way to help support others, right? Be that light to someone else, to show up, and how you show up in the world can be an inspiration to someone else. Are you continuously agitated? Or are you that steadfast rock that as the wind blows the dirt and the dust by? So when we ground ourselves in the Dharma, right, it's a wonderful way to find our own balance, cultivating peace. When we cultivate peace, we're not always simply just cultivating it within ourselves. We're cultivating it in the field of humanity. So when the world needs steady people, right? When the world is divided, the greatest gift that we can offer is stability. And you don't need to fix everything. You don't need to win every argument. Excuse me. And you don't even need to change people's views. Right? Simply what you can do is simply remain present, and sane and compassionate and awake. And then, like I said, being that role model, your peace becomes contagious. And your presence becomes medicine. We can be a doctor that way, prescribing peace, prescribing a sense of balance. And we can practice deep listening. In the Serengeti Sutta, the Buddha describes the power of listening with a mind that is open, receptive, and unshaken. And this kind of listening dissolves walls, right? And so try listening to others with no agenda, right? Don't go in there with those preconceived this is what I want to say. Right? Let go of the feeling or that need to be right. And no preparation in your next response. Just spacious awareness. Just listening. Oftentimes when people go on a rant and a rave, they're venting, they just want to be heard. Doesn't matter whether you agree with them or not. Just listening sometimes is the medicine that you can offer. And understanding that just listening with no agenda, with no need to be right or wrong, or without the need to have a witty response, that's not passive. That's transformative. Again, like I said, people often just want to be heard. And so when others feel hatred, they soften because of it, because of listening, of you just listening. And then when we feel heard, we soften ourselves. Do you ever think about that? How much better do you feel when you know you've just been heard? You've had such a rough day, whatever it was, and you need to vent to someone. You need to get it off your chest, right? So sometimes just being heard is how we can soften ourselves. So division melts through that understanding. And practicing loving kindness in the Metta Sutta offers a universal remedy, right? May all beings be at ease. May they be safe. May their hearts be peaceful. And then when the Buddha taught loving kindness, he wasn't asking us to approve of everyone's actions. He was asking us to stop poisoning our own hearts with ill will. So oftentimes when we think of healing, we think of something big and grandiose, right? Maybe coming over a significant illness type of healing. Probably one of the biggest significant illnesses people have are what goes on in here, in our minds. Because what affects our minds affects our heart. And so oftentimes the biggest healing that we can help ourselves with and others, right? It's just listening, stop judging, and so try offering loving kindness forward. Someone you care about, someone you struggle with, someone you fear, and just as importantly, yourself. And the heart becomes spacious enough to hold the entire world with enough practice. Remember we talked about separateness? When we have enough space in our world, in our heart, there is no separateness. Right, Gus? And practicing equanimity, right? Equanimity, Pika, is the great stabilizer, right? And the Buddha taught that equanimity is the understanding that all beings are the owners of their actions. Right? And this frees us from trying to control everything or everyone. We learn to do our part, offer our compassion, and then release. And equanimity is not indifference. Equanimity is love plus wisdom plus balance. And so the little story was that there once was a group of monks who fell into dispute over some very minor rules. And this argument became so heated that they stopped listening to one another. And that spilled over into the lay community because the lay community became distressed and asked the Buddha to intervene. But the Buddha said, I cannot help those who do not listen, right? He left the monastery and went to stay alone in the forest. And then without the Buddha's presence, the monks felt the heaviness of their behavior, and their minds were disturbed. Their hearts were unsettled. They realized that their anger and division were harming the Sangha and themselves. So we don't have to have a huge Sangha, though, right? We can have just maybe our family life, if we think about that. And eventually they went to the Buddha and apologized, and he taught them that when you live in harmony, in unity, looking upon each other with eyes of love, you bring happiness to the whole community. And so it teaches us, not just for monastics, but like I just said, for families, family harmony, for workplaces, for friendships, for countries, and for the global community. And so what are some practical ways we can ground ourselves each day? And so as we close, let's consider some of those simple daily practices, and simply beginning each morning with that grounding breath, right? 3 slow breaths in and out, and returning to our center. Limiting time spent absorbing divisive content, not out of avoidance, but to protect your clarity. And we often feel that we have to be informed citizens. We have to know what's going on in the world, to a point. But oftentimes, a lot of the conflicts that we see do not involve us. And it just kind of triggers. And the algorithms, right? Whether you're on Facebook or even YouTube or whatever, Twitter or X nowadays, a lot of those things that we look at, they know. That sounds like one of those conspiracy things. But the algorithms are designed to say, oh, this person's spending this time looking at, this particular topic, and they're going to see more of that topic. So spending less time absorbing divisive content, right, protects our own clarity. Practicing pause before speaking, right? A single mindful breath can save you from 1,000 regrets, right? Sometimes it's just better to listen, right? Not all statements deserve a response. And sometimes even I have gotten the look like, aren't you going to say anything? No. What am I going to say? You've already said everything, right? Remember, we're not out there to try to change minds in that sense, right? It's not debates. It's not forceful. It doesn't help my own clarity. It doesn't bring peace to me. I'm going back and forth. Sometimes people just like to pick fights. And so when that happens, right, send loving kindness to someone we disagree with, right? Not because they are right, but because you are free, right? And remembering impermanence, right? Whatever the conflict is, it will pass. It will pass. And so we need to practice our balance, right? Our mindful breathing. And so kind of wrapping up a little bit more, becoming that light in the world. And so, again, we are living in challenging times. But we had challenging times 50 years ago. We had challenging times 100 years ago. We had challenging times 500 years ago, back into, antiquity. But the Dharma was specifically made for challenging times. And the Buddha did not teach us to withdraw from the world. He taught us to live in the world without being overwhelmed by it. He taught us to become islands of refuge, places of calm in the midst of the storm. Think about that big rock again, that visual, like that big rock with all the dirt and the sand and dust blowing around, but that rock is steadfast. And so when the world is divided, we practice unity. When the world is angry, we practice compassion. When the world is confused, we practice clarity. When the world is afraid, we practice grounding back into the Dharma. And the Dharma does not ask us to be perfect. Right? It simply asks us to be present. Right? Simply just being present is enough. And so let us walk this path together, rooted in mindfulness, guided by compassion, and grounded in wisdom. So with that, my friends, thank you very much for spending your time with us as we talk about how to ground ourselves in a divided world and how we practice grounding for us, how that actually helps others, not just us. And so our next talk, we can actually say we'll see you next year at this point. For our next talk, it'll be on January 5th, 2026. So it's a Monday morning at 6:30 a.m. in the Central Time Zone. And with that, my dear friends, I wish you all many blessings. May Buddha bless you and be balanced. And certainly let us know if you need anything. Feel free to contact us, by email or instant message or whatever's best for you. We'd always love to help and hear from you all. With that, my friends, dear practitioners, Namo Buddhaya.